Most people today fear death, imagining it as a distant, separate world. But in ancient Egypt, the dead were never truly gone. For thousands of years, families slept beside tombs, resting near the mummified bodies of ancestors without fear. Nighttime was not a time of terror, but a space of connection, reflection, and subtle guidance. Dreams carried messages, offerings maintained bonds. The living and the dead existed side by side, quietly intertwined. This was not superstition but daily life, a rhythm of care, presence, and continuity that shaped generations, blending life, death, and sleep into a calm, enduring harmony. Most people believe the dead are meant to be kept far away from the living, behind walls, beneath the ground, separated by silence. But in ancient Egypt, this idea did not exist. For thousands of years, people slept just a few steps away from the dead, sometimes above them, sometimes beside them, sometimes sharing the same walls. To them, this was not frightening, it was comforting. The dead were not gone. They were still part of the household, still listening, still watching, still present in the slow rhythm of everyday life. In ancient Egypt, death was not an ending. It was a continuation. Life flowed forward, changed in form but not in presence. This belief shaped everything: how homes were built, how cities were planned, how people rested at night. Tombs were not distant places meant to be avoided. They were carefully positioned close to homes, temples, and living spaces. Some families even built their houses near burial grounds on purpose, believing the presence of ancestors brought protection and balance. The Egyptians believed the human soul was made of many parts. The body mattered, but so did the ka, the ba, and the oc aspects of the self that moved between worlds. Sleep itself was seen as a temporary journey of the soul, a quiet, drifting, not unlike death. Because of this, sleeping near the dead felt natural. When night fell and people lay down to rest, they believed they were entering the same realm the dead already inhabited. Homes in ancient Egypt were simple structures, often built from mud brick. They were warm during the day and cool at night. These homes existed close to tombs carved into hillsides or built into the earth. In villages near the Nile, it was common to walk past burial chambers daily, to sit near them, to sleep within their presence. Children grew up seeing tomb entrances as part of the landscape, not as something strange or threatening. At night, families slept on reed mats or low wooden beds. The air was still, broken only by insects and distant water. In these quiet hours, the dead were believed to move freely. Dreams were taken seriously, not as imagination, but as messages. Many Egyptians believed ancestors visited the living during sleep, offering guidance, warnings, or reassurance. Sleeping near the dead made these encounters more likely, more vivid, more meaningful. Archaeological evidence shows that many tombs were designed with benches, offering tables, and small rooms. These were not just for ceremonies. They were places where the living returned often. Food was brought, water was poured, incense burned slowly. Some people even rested inside tombs during festivals or long rituals, falling asleep in their presence without fear. The boundary between living space and burial space was thin. The dead were not silent in Egyptian belief. They were active members of the community. They could influence crops, health, dreams, and fortune. If neglected, they could become restless. If honored, they brought harmony. Sleeping near them was a form of respect, a way of saying, "You are still with us." Priests and temple workers sometimes slept within sacred complexes where mummies were stored. This practice was not hidden or unusual, it was purposeful. Sleep was a time when communication between worlds became easier. Stillness allowed the mind to open. Silence made space for signs and messages. In this calm state, being close to the dead was believed to strengthen spiritual awareness. The desert itself played a role. The dry air preserved bodies, making the presence of the dead feel less distant. Tombs did not decay quickly. Names remained carved in stone. Images stayed visible. The dead felt permanent. Sleeping nearby reinforced the idea that time moved slowly, that generations overlapped rather than replaced one another. Unlike modern fear of death, ancient Egyptians cultivated familiarity. Children were taught the names of ancestors. They learned where family members were buried. These places were visited regularly. During festivals, entire communities gathered near tombs, eating, resting, and sometimes sleeping there as night fell. Laughter and quiet conversation blended with reverence. To sleep beside the dead was not a sign of grief, it was a sign of continuity. Life and death were two states of the same journey, one moved by daylight, the other by night. Sleep connected them. Every evening, as eyes closed, the living joined the realm the dead already knew. This belief did not make Egyptians reckless or detached from life. On the contrary, it made daily routines meaningful. Every action echoed beyond the present moment. Even sleep was sacred. How one rested, where one rested, and who rested nearby all mattered. As darkness settled over the Nile and lamps flickered out, families lay down knowing they were not alone. Beneath the ground or just beyond the wall, ancestors remained close, watching, remembering, waiting. And so, night after night, for thousands of years, ancient Egyptians slept beside the dead, not in fear, but in calm acceptance, believing that in sleep, life and death gently touched. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a journey back in time, thousands of years ago, to the land of the pharaohs. We're going to explore what life was really like for the ancient Egyptians and uncover their fascinating, and sometimes surprising, relationship with death. Now, when you think of ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? Probably pyramids, mummies, and golden treasures, right? And you're not wrong. But there's so much more to their story. The Egyptians built one of the most enduring civilizations in history, lasting for over 3,000 years. Their world was centered around the Nile River, a lifeline that flooded its banks every year, depositing rich black silt that made the land incredibly fertile. This annual flood, which they called the inundation, was the foundation of their entire society. It dictated their calendar, their agriculture, and even their religious beliefs. Life for the average Egyptian was tied to this cycle. Most people were farmers. During the growing season, they'd be out in the fields, cultivating wheat and barley to make bread and beer, the staples of their diet. They also grew vegetables, like onions, garlic, and lettuce. Once the harvest was in, and the Nile began to rise again, many of these farmers would be conscripted for massive state-building projects. That's right, the very same people who grew your food might have spent part of their year helping to build the magnificent temples at Karnak, or even the pyramids themselves. It was a form of taxation, paying with labor instead of money. But it wasn't all farming and building. Egyptian society was highly structured. At the very top, you had the pharaoh, who was seen as a living god, the intermediary between the divine and the human world. Below the pharaoh were the elites, high priests, nobles, and powerful officials like the vizier, who was essentially the pharaoh's right-hand man. These people lived lives of luxury, in large, beautifully decorated villas with gardens and pools. Then you had the skilled artisans and craftspeople, the stonemasons, carpenters, jewelers, and scribes. Scribes were especially respected. They were the record keepers, the administrators, the ones who mastered the complex hieroglyphic writing system. Becoming a scribe was one of the few ways a person from a lower class could climb the social ladder. It took years of difficult training, but it was a ticket to a better, more comfortable life. And what about family life? The family was the core of Egyptian society. They valued children and saw them as a blessing. Art from the time often shows loving families, with parents and children shown in affectionate poses. Women in ancient Egypt had a surprisingly high status compared to many other ancient cultures. They could own property, run businesses, and even inherit the throne, as famous female pharaohs like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra proved. While their main role was often seen as managing the household and raising children, they were far from powerless. Now, let's talk about something the Egyptians are truly famous for: their obsession with the afterlife. But here's the key: they weren't obsessed with death itself, they were obsessed with life. They loved life so much that they wanted it to continue forever, even after they passed away. Their entire view of death was shaped by this desire for eternal life. For them, death wasn't an end, but a transition. It was a dangerous journey you had to undertake through the underworld, known as the what, before you could reach the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds was basically a perfect version of Egypt, where the sun always shone. The crops were always plentiful, and you could be reunited with your loved ones. But getting there wasn't easy. First, your soul had to pass a series of tests and challenges, guarded by terrifying gods and monsters. This is where the Book of the Dead comes in. It wasn't really a single book, but a collection of spells, hymns, and instructions, a kind of afterlife guidebook. Wealthy Egyptians would have a personalized copy buried with them to help them navigate the dangers of the underworld and answer the tricky questions posed by the gods. The most crucial test was the weighing of the heart. The deceased would be led by the god Anubis into the Hall of Two Truths. There, Their heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of intelligence and memory, would be weighed on a giant scale against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and justice. If your heart was lighter than the feather, it meant you had lived a good and just life, and you were granted passage to the field of reeds. But if your heart was heavy with sins, it would be devoured by a terrifying beast named a meter, monstrous hybrid of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippopotamus. This meant your soul would cease to exist forever, a fate the Egyptians feared more than anything else. This belief in a physical afterlife is why mummification was so important. The Egyptians believed that your soul, or your ka and ba, needed to be able to recognize and return to your body to receive sustenance in the afterlife. So, the body had to be preserved as perfectly as possible. The process of mummification was complex and took about 70 days. The internal organs, except for the heart, were removed and preserved separately in what we call canopic jars. The body was then dried out using a type of salt called natron, and finally, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. Amulets and spells were often tucked within the wrappings for extra protection. And of course, they needed all their stuff for the afterlife. Tombs were like eternal homes filled with everything a person might need: furniture, food, clothing, tools, games, and even statuettes of servants called shabdis, who were meant to magically come to life and do the hard labor for you in the field of reeds. The incredible treasures found in Tutankhamun's tomb give us a stunning glimpse into this practice. It wasn't just about showing off wealth, it was a practical preparation for an eternal existence that was meant to be just as real and tangible as their life on earth. So you see, the Egyptian relationship with the dead wasn't morbid, it was hopeful. Their pyramids, their mummies, their elaborate tombs, they weren't monuments to death, they were monuments to life, and the unshakable belief that a good life on earth would be rewarded with an even better one that lasted forever. It's a powerful and profoundly human idea that drove their art, their architecture, and their entire way of thinking for millennia. It reminds us that across time and cultures, we all share that deep desire for our lives, and the lives of those we love, to have meaning and to continue in some way. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into ancient Egypt. Night held a special meaning in ancient Egypt. When the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, it was not thought of as absence or danger, but as a journey. Just as the sun traveled through the underworld each night to rise again at dawn, the human soul was believed to wander during sleep. This made nighttime a sacred period, when the distance between the living and the dead became smaller and easier to cross. Sleep was not considered unconsciousness. It was a state of movement. Egyptians believed that during sleep, parts of the soul loosened from the body and traveled freely. This was why dreams were taken so seriously. A dream was not simply a product of the mind, but an experience, a visit, a message, or a warning. Sleeping near the dead increased the chance that these messages would arrive clearly. Many people believed ancestors chose night to communicate. During the day, the living world was too busy, too loud. At night, when lamps dimmed and voices softened, the dead could be heard more easily. People paid close attention to their dreams, especially those involving deceased relatives. Such dreams were remembered carefully and shared in the morning, discussed with family members or priests. Dream interpretation was an accepted practice. There were even written dream manuals that listed common images and their meanings. Seeing water, animals, food, or certain actions in dreams was believed to hold specific messages. When a dream involved the dead, it carried particular importance. It might signal approval, concern, or guidance. Sleeping close to tombs was believed to make these dreams stronger and more meaningful. Some Egyptians intentionally prepared themselves before sleep. They washed, spoke prayers, and calmed their thoughts. Silence was valued. In these moments, lying near the resting place of ancestors felt protective rather than unsettling. The presence of the dead was believed to guide the soul safely through the night's journey. Priests sometimes slept inside temple complexes or tombs to receive dreams on behalf of others. These dreams might offer guidance for healing, agriculture, or community decisions. The dead, having already crossed into another state of existence, were considered closer to divine understanding. Their advice was trusted, not feared. Children were taught from an early age that dreams mattered. They learned to listen, remember, and share what they saw at night. Nighttime was not a time of terror stories or fear. It was a time of quiet respect. Lamps were placed carefully. Beds were arranged thoughtfully. The environment was made calm to encourage peaceful rest and clear dreaming. The physical closeness of tombs enhanced this atmosphere. Stone walls and earth held coolness and silence. These qualities were associated with stability and order. Sleeping near them created a sense of grounding, a feeling of being held by something ancient and steady. The dead were also believed to protect sleepers from harm. Their presence kept away chaos and disorder. If a household experienced repeated bad dreams or restless sleep, it was sometimes believed that an ancestor had been neglected. Offerings would be renewed, names spoken again, balance restored. Night after night, this cycle repeated. Sleep, dreams, reflection, waking. The boundary between worlds remained thin but calm. There was no urgency to cross it, no fear of what lay beyond. The dead did not pull the living away. They watched quietly, offering guidance only when needed. Over generations, this belief shaped behavior. People learned to approach rest with respect. Sleep was not wasted time. It was an active state, a necessary passage that mirrored the greater journey of life and death. To sleep near the dead was to acknowledge this connection openly. As the land grew quiet under starlight, families lay down knowing their ancestors rested nearby. Dreams drifted gently through the night. The sun would return in the morning, as it always did, and between these 2 points, dusk and dawn, the living and the dead shared the same calm space, connected by sleep. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a loop, doing the same things every day, hoping for a different result? It's a feeling so many of us know well. You want to grow, to change, to become a better version of yourself, but it feels like there's an invisible wall holding you back. What if I told you that the key to breaking through that wall isn't some grand, complicated secret, but a series of small, intentional habits? Today, we're diving deep into the science and art of building a better you, one habit at a time. This isn't just about motivation. It's about building a system for your life that makes success almost automatic. So, let's start with the big question. Why are habits so powerful? Think of your brain as a super-efficient computer. It's always looking for ways to save energy. When you do something repeatedly, your brain creates a shortcut, a neural pathway. This is a habit loop, a cue, a routine, and a reward. For example, the cue might be feeling stressed, the routine, reaching for a sugary snack, the reward, a temporary burst of comfort and energy. The more you repeat this loop, the stronger that pathway becomes, until it's almost second nature. This is fantastic for good habits, like automatically brushing your teeth, but it can work against us when it comes to bad ones. The good news is, we can consciously design new loops that serve us better. The first step is identifying what you want to change, but instead of saying, "I want to be healthier," which is vague, we need to get specific. This is where the magic of identity-based habits comes in. Don't focus on the outcome, like losing 20 pounds. Focus on the type of person you want to become. Ask yourself, what would a healthy person do? They might not skip workouts. They might choose water over soda. So, your new identity is I am a person who moves my body every day, or I am a person who nourishes my body with healthy food. Every time you make a choice that aligns with that new identity, you're casting a vote for the person you want to be. Each small action reinforces that belief. Now, how do we actually build these new routines? Let's use the 4 laws of behavior change, a concept popularized by James Clear. The first law is, make it obvious. You want to make the cues for your good habits impossible to miss. Want to drink more water? Don't just hide a bottle in the fridge. Place a large water bottle on your desk, right where you can see it, first thing in the morning. Want to read more? Put a book on your pillow. The goal is to design your environment so that the right choice is the most obvious one. Conversely, for bad habits, you want to make the cue invisible. If you're trying to cut down on junk food, don't keep it in the house. Out of sight, out of mind. The second law is, make it attractive. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure and reward. So, how can we make our new habits more appealing? One powerful technique is called temptation bundling. This is where you pair an action you asterisk want asterisk to do with an action you asterisk need asterisk to do. For example, maybe you love listening to your favorite podcast or watching a certain show. Only allow yourself to do that while you're on the treadmill or doing your workout. You'll start to associate the effort of exercise with the pleasure of entertainment. Your brain will begin to look forward to it. It's about linking what you have to do with what you get to do. Next up, the third law, make it easy. This is perhaps the most crucial one when you're starting out. We often fail because we try to do too much, too soon. We get a burst of motivation, decide to go to the gym for 2 hours every day, and burn out within a week. Instead, apply the 2-minute rule. Whatever your new habit is, scale it down to something that takes less than 2 minutes to do. Read every day becomes read 1 page. Do yoga becomes take out my yoga mat. Run 3 miles becomes put on my running shoes. Anyone can do something for 2 minutes. The point isn't to get results in those 2 minutes. The point is to master the art of showing up. You're building the habit of starting. Once you've started, it's much easier to continue. And finally, the 4th law, make it satisfying. A habit will only stick if you feel a sense of immediate success. The problem is, many good habits have delayed rewards. You don't get a six-pack after one sit-up. So, we need to create our own immediate rewards. One of the best ways to do this is with a habit tracker. Get a calendar and put a big X on every day you complete your habit. Seeing that chain of X's grow is incredibly satisfying. You won't want to break the chain. This visual proof of your progress gives your brain the little hit of dopamine it craves, reinforcing the behavior and making you want to do it again tomorrow. It's a simple, but powerful, psychological trick. Now, let's talk about the inevitable setbacks. You will have days where you mess up. You'll skip a workout, eat the cake, or stay up too late. This is not failure, it's data. The most important rule here is, never miss twice. Missing 1 day is an accident. Missing 2 days is the start of a new, negative habit. So, if you fall off the horse, the most critical thing you can do is get back on track with the very next opportunity. Don't let one slip-up spiral into a week of bad choices. Be kind to yourself, acknowledge it happened, and then immediately get back to your system. Consistency isn't about being perfect. It's about refusing to let one mistake derail you. Let's put this all together with a practical example. Let's say your goal is to write a book. The identity you're adopting is, I am a writer. First, make it obvious. Schedule a specific time and place for writing. Maybe it's 7 a.m. at your kitchen table. Put your laptop and a cup of coffee there the night before. Second, make it attractive. Bundle it with something you enjoy. Maybe you get to have your favorite gourmet coffee only during your writing time. Third, make it easy. Start with the 2-minute rule. Your goal isn't to write a chapter. It's to write 1 sentence. Just open a document and write 1 single sentence. You'll likely find that once you start, you'll write more. Fourth, make it satisfying. Use a habit tracker. Mark off every day you write your sentence. Or, create a word count spreadsheet and watch the number climb. Celebrate small milestones, like finishing a page or a chapter. This system isn't about a sudden, heroic transformation. It's about the quiet power of daily, incremental progress. It's about becoming 1% better every day. It might not sound like much, but the compound effect of that is astounding. Over a year, a 1% daily improvement results in you being nearly 38 times better. It's the small habits that pave the way for remarkable results. So I want you to think about one small thing you can start today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. What's one habit you can scale down to 2 minutes? What's one cue you can add to your environment right now? What's one way you can make it just a little more satisfying? The journey to a better you doesn't start with a giant leap. It starts with a single, tiny step, repeated over and over again. You have the power to redesign your habits and, in doing so, redesign your life. Thank you so much for watching. The Egyptians cared deeply for the body of the deceased. Mummification was not merely a ritual. It was a practical and spiritual process designed to preserve a person's presence for centuries. By carefully preparing the body, wrapping it in linen, and storing it with oils and resins, they ensured that the dead remained recognizable and enduring. This preservation made sleeping near the tombs feel safe and natural. The ancestors were not distant or decayed figures. They were present, tangible, and cared for. Mummies were placed in stone or wooden coffins, often decorated with inscriptions, protective symbols, and depictions of daily life. These coffins were carefully positioned within tombs that were sealed, yet accessible. The Egyptians believed that the soul could leave the body and return at will. Therefore, the physical presence of the body was both anchor and guide. It gave structure to the afterlife, creating a bridge between the living and the dead. Families visited the tombs frequently. Offerings of bread, beer, fruits, and flowers were brought regularly, not just on special occasions. The act of leaving food or water symbolized a continued relationship with the deceased. When night fell, the living might sleep nearby, resting close to these preserved bodies. The presence of mummies reassured them. Death was no longer unknown or frightening. It had form, texture, and stability. The tombs were often designed with multiple chambers, creating spaces for both the dead and the living. Some had small platforms or benches, intended for resting during long visits. Lamps were left burning, and traces of soot suggest that people lingered there, sometimes through the night. Sleep near these preserved bodies was seen as respectful, even beneficial. It reinforced the connection between the living and their ancestors. The belief in the power of preservation extended to the surrounding environment. Tombs were built in locations that offered natural protection: cliffs, rocky hills, or desert edges. Dry air slowed decay, keeping bodies intact for centuries. Families understood that this environment allowed them to maintain a relationship with their dead across generations. Sleeping nearby was not an act of fear, but of trust. The ancestors remained present, enduring through time. Children were taught to treat the mummies with care and reverence. They learned which ancestors were honored in which chambers, and what offerings were appropriate. For them, the tombs were part of their daily world, familiar and comforting. Sleeping near these spaces was an ordinary practice, linking them to the long line of family history. The presence of the preserved body offered lessons in continuity, mortality, and responsibility. The Egyptians also believed in the protective power of the dead. A well-preserved ancestor could guard against misfortune. Their presence stabilized the household. Dreams were clearer, illnesses were less frequent. By sleeping near them, the living remained within a sphere of safety. The mummies were silent companions, watching over nightly slumber and maintaining balance between worlds. Even the smallest tombs reflected this belief. Simple family burials in mud-brick enclosures or near homes often included modest coffins, small offerings, and inscriptions. People rested nearby without fear. They knew that the presence of a loved one, carefully preserved, provided guidance, comfort, and security. Sleep became an extension of the living relationship, a nightly reaffirmation of connection. Over centuries, this practice shaped the rhythm of Egyptian life. Nighttime was not a separation from the past. It was a continuation. People rested with ancestors close by, in familiar proximity. Tombs were not feared as distant, unknown places. They were homes for memory, for continuity, and for gentle companionship. As darkness fell over fields, villages, and the edge of the desert, families lay down near their preserved dead. Breath slowed, minds softened, and sleep arrived. The living and the preserved dead shared space, maintaining balance between life and afterlife. Each night reinforced the bond. Each morning confirmed continuity. In this calm coexistence, the Egyptians wove death into life, sleep into remembrance, and presence into eternity. Daily life in ancient Egypt intertwined quietly with the presence of the dead. Tombs were not distant monuments but active parts of neighborhoods and households. People carried out ordinary tasks: cooking, weaving, fetching water, and tending fields, all while living alongside ancestors. The dead were always nearby, their resting places carefully maintained and visited. Offerings of food, drink, and small tokens were left regularly, not merely on ceremonial occasions. These gestures were small, repetitive, and calm, forming an invisible connection that stretched across generations. Families incorporated these rituals into daily routines. Morning and evening often included a brief acknowledgement, a whispered name, a small portion of bread or fruit set aside, a quiet nod of respect. Children learned these habits naturally, without ceremony or fanfare, and they grew up understanding that the dead were participants in daily life. These practices were not driven by fear or superstition, but by familiarity and recognition of continuity. The dead were steady presences, reminding the living of lineage, identity, and care. Tombs themselves reflected this connection. Many were designed to be accessible and functional, not sealed away. Benches, small platforms, and open courtyards provided spaces for sitting, resting, or even sleeping near the deceased. Lamps left traces of soot, evidence that people remained within tombs for hours at a time. Families occasionally spent entire nights in these spaces, particularly during festivals or extended visits. Blending domestic activity with ritual observance, the boundary between living space and burial space was permeable, reinforcing the sense that life and death were continuous rather than separated. Festivals of the dead, like the Festival of the Valley, were central to this daily interplay. Communities would gather near tombs along the Nile, carrying offerings, food, and sometimes bedding. People shared meals, rested together, and slept in proximity to ancestors. The atmosphere was calm and communal, rather than mournful or frightening. Music, soft conversation, and the smell of incense blended with the cool night air. Children witnessed these gatherings as a natural part of life, reinforcing the normalization of living closely with the dead. Sleep itself was understood as a time when the boundary between worlds became thinner. The Egyptians believed that during rest, the soul moved partially into the afterlife, and ancestors could communicate through dreams or gentle guidance. By sleeping near tombs, families maintained a constant connection. Dreams were carefully noted and interpreted. Messages from ancestors were not feared. They were observed, remembered, and discussed. This practice encouraged mindfulness and reflection, allowing the living to integrate the wisdom of generations past into everyday decisions. The architecture of tombs also supported this coexistence. Chambers were often decorated with scenes of family life, agriculture, and daily labor. Reliefs and inscriptions reminded visitors of the continuity of life. Sleeping or resting near these images reinforced the sense that ancestors were still part of the ongoing household, quietly observing and participating in life. Even small, modest tombs reflected this understanding, incorporating spaces for visitation, offerings, and occasional rest. Preservation played a crucial role. Well-mummified bodies, protected by dry air and sealed environments, reinforced the sense that ancestors remained present and enduring. Seeing a preserved loved one reassured the living, creating calm rather than fear. Tombs, combined with these preserved remains, provided stability and comfort, both practical and spiritual. Families trusted that the presence of the dead offered guidance, protection, and balance, even in the most ordinary moments. Tending a field, fetching water, or preparing food, the living were mindful of the dead nearby. The relationship was subtle, almost background, but constant. Sleep, in particular, became a period of quiet connection. Children, adults, and elders all rested in proximity to those who had gone before, reinforcing a sense of safety, continuity, and calm presence. This integration of the dead into daily life illustrates a broader Egyptian philosophy. Life and death were not opposites, but stages of the same ongoing journey. Sleep, rituals, offerings, and visitation created a living tapestry in which generations overlapped seamlessly. The dead were participants, not spectators. Their presence was constant, gentle, and enduring. And so, night after night, families rested in the steady shadow of their ancestors. The living slept beside tombs, breathing slowly, listening to the quiet movements of the night. Offerings and prayers left the day before had been consumed, remembered, and returned in subtle guidance. Life continued uninterrupted, and death remained intimately close. Not feared but accepted as a natural and essential companion. As night deepened, the Egyptians believed the veil between the living and the dead became thinner. Sleep was not merely rest but a temporary journey of the soul. In this state, the living could encounter their ancestors, receive guidance, and understand subtle messages. Dreams were not dismissed as random thoughts. They were carefully observed and interpreted. The dead were thought to communicate through these dreams, offering advice, warnings, or reassurance. Sleeping near tombs or family burials made such experiences more likely, providing a gentle bridge between worlds. Dreams held particular significance. People recorded them, repeated them aloud, and compared notes with others. Seeing a deceased relative in a dream was considered a blessing. These encounters were gentle and calm, often appearing as ordinary conversations or simple gestures. A dream might show an ancestor performing a familiar task, offering a piece of advice, or simply smiling in acknowledgement. Such visions reassured the living that the dead were present, caring, and aware. The practice of interpreting dreams was structured and deliberate. Manuals and scribes documented common dream images and their meanings. Water, animals, foods, or specific actions were understood symbolically. Dreams involving ancestors were prioritized. Families and priests sometimes spent nights near tombs to encourage these messages, believing that proximity strengthened communication. Sleep was not passive. It became an active spiritual practice, fostering reflection, understanding, and calm preparation for the day ahead. Children, too, learned to pay attention to dreams. Elders would ask about what they had seen upon waking, encouraging careful recall. Dreams were discussed in gentle conversation, not in fear. Through these discussions, children internalized the idea that death was continuity, not absence. The living and the dead shared knowledge, experience, and guidance across generations, mediated by the stillness of night. The design of tombs reflected this understanding. Open courtyards, benches, and low platforms allowed visitors to rest or sleep in proximity. Walls carved with familiar scenes and hieroglyphs reminded sleepers of family and daily life. These images reinforced a comforting sense of presence. When a person rested near such carvings, they felt accompanied by the deceased, as if ancestors were quietly observing and supporting them. Sleep became intertwined with memory, protection, and continuity. Even the simplest households integrated this practice. A modest burial space near a home might include a small platform or mat for resting. Lamps were placed carefully, casting soft light on walls adorned with the names and likenesses of ancestors. Food offerings, water, or small items were left beside tombs, quietly consumed in spirit by the dead. In this calm environment, nightly rest became a ritual of connection. The living did not fear the presence of the dead. They felt accompanied, guided, and safe. Messages from the dead were not always explicit. Sometimes they appeared as subtle feelings, a gentle nudge toward caution, a sense of reassurance, or an inexplicable sense of timing. Families learned to trust these quiet influences. Sleep allowed reflection, insight, and calm decision-making. Being near the tombs enhanced this process. Proximity to the preserved bodies, the inscriptions, and the familiar spaces of ancestors strengthened the sense of shared existence. Even illness or difficulty was interpreted through dreams. If a household struggled, sleeping near a respected tomb could provide guidance. Offerings were renewed, prayers spoken, and rest taken in the presence of the dead. It was a reciprocal relationship. Ancestors were honored by attention and presence. In return, they were believed to protect and advise during the vulnerable hours of night. Through centuries, this practice reinforced a worldview in which life and death were continuous, intertwined, and gently overlapping. Sleep was a tool for maintaining connection, understanding, and presence. The dead were not forgotten but remembered, experienced, and engaged with nightly. Dreams were their subtle voice, guiding the living with quiet wisdom. As night passed over the Nile and its surrounding settlements, people rested calmly near tombs. Lamps burned low, the air cooled, children lay near elders, adults lay near tomb walls. Dreams drifted softly, guidance arrived in quiet, imperceptible ways. The living and the dead shared the night in gentle coexistence, connected by sleep, memory, and calm observation. And so, night after night, the Egyptians practiced this quiet communion. Sleep became more than rest. It became a bridge, a rhythm, and a reassurance. The dead remained present, active, and protective. The living rested in harmony with those who had gone before, allowing dreams and intuition to guide them through both night and day, weaving life and death together in a seamless, enduring rhythm. In many Egyptian homes, life and death coexisted quietly over centuries. Tombs were not distant monuments to be visited only once, but enduring parts of the household and community. Families maintained these burial spaces over generations, returning regularly to offer food, water, and attention. The dead were participants in daily life, and this intimacy extended into the night. People rested, and sometimes even slept, near tombs without fear. The ancestors were familiar presences, steady companions in a world that moved slowly but surely. Multi-generational tombs were common, especially among extended families. These tombs were designed to accommodate successive generations of the deceased. Chambers were added, inscriptions updated, and spaces for offerings carefully maintained. The living understood that these spaces were not frozen in time. They evolved as life continued. By visiting, resting, and sleeping nearby, families reinforced the connection across generations. Each night, the living reaffirmed the presence of the past, integrating it seamlessly into daily existence. Children grew up in this environment of continuous memory. They played near tombs, listened to stories about ancestors, and observed adults tending offerings. When evening arrived, mats were spread near burial chambers, and lamps flickered softly on walls carved with names and images. Children learned that sleep near the dead was ordinary and safe. They understood that ancestors were guardians, not threats, and that the rhythm of daily life was intertwined with the enduring presence of the past. Even modest households participated in these nightly practices. A simple family tomb near a home might include a small platform for rest, a mat for temporary sleeping, or a quiet space for reflection. Lamps burned low, food offerings were replenished, and prayers were whispered. The space created an environment of calm. Sleep became an opportunity to feel the guidance, protection, and comfort of ancestors. It was a subtle, ongoing ritual rather than a dramatic event, blending seamlessly with domestic life. During special occasions, the presence of the dead became more visible but remained calm. Festivals, anniversaries, and seasonal rituals often involved extended stays near tombs. Families brought bedding and food, remaining for several hours or overnight. They sang quietly, shared stories, and tended offerings. Children and adults alike rested nearby. The dead were present, but not threatening. The rhythm of life and death flowed together gently, marked by attention and care rather than fear. The Egyptians also recognized that time changed both living and dead. Tombs weathered, inscriptions faded slightly, and offerings needed renewal. Maintaining presence over generations required patience and consistency. Sleep near tombs became part of this practice, a way to stay connected when the sun had set, when activity slowed, and when reflection was easiest. Nighttime created a calm space for continuity, reminding the living of the enduring presence of family across time. Even the smallest gestures mattered. A piece of bread left by the tomb, a whispered name, a mat laid for rest, each contributed to the sense of ongoing care. Over centuries, these small acts created networks of remembrance that shaped households, communities, and cultural identity. The dead were never abandoned. Sleep became a daily affirmation of this enduring relationship. The environment of tombs reinforced this calm coexistence. Stone walls and earth preserved temperature and silence, creating spaces that were naturally restful. Even when people slept beside burial chambers, they experienced coolness, stillness, and security. The presence of ancestors, preserved in body, name, and image, provided stability. Families trusted that the dead watched over them gently during the vulnerable hours of night. Through this practice, generations of Egyptians learned that life and death were inseparable. Nightly rest near tombs created continuity, understanding, and comfort. Sleep was not isolation. It was a shared experience, linking the living to those who had passed, grounding children in the memory and care of their ancestors, and offering calm guidance across centuries. And so, night after night, families rested near tombs. The living lay quietly on mats, lamps flickering softly. Children drifted into sleep with the sense of being protected and remembered. The dead remained close, steady companions in a slow-moving, continuous world. Life and death intertwined naturally, quietly, and calmly, as the rhythm of generations persisted beneath the stars, unchanged and enduring. Over centuries, the practice of sleeping near the dead became deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture. It was not merely habit, it was a quiet form of spiritual continuity. Families understood that ancestors were more than memories. They were active participants in the ongoing life of the household. By sleeping near tombs, the living maintained a subtle connection, honoring the presence of those who had gone before while drawing guidance, comfort, and protection from their enduring existence. These nightly practices reinforced cultural memory. Every whispered name, every replenished offering, and every night spent resting near tombs became part of a larger, unbroken rhythm that stretched across generations. Children internalized the importance of family and ancestry naturally, observing elders' care and mimicking these quiet rituals. By participating in this routine, they learned patience, respect, and the gentle rhythm of life, interwoven with death. Households often managed multiple tombs over time. As families grew, new burial spaces were added to accommodate additional ancestors. These spaces were maintained continuously. Lamps were tended, food and drink offerings replaced, and small prayers spoken. Sleep became part of this caretaking. By resting nearby, the living reaffirmed their commitment to the deceased. Ancestors were never neglected. Presence and attention, even in stillness, maintained harmony between generations. The spiritual dimension of this practice was subtle but profound. Ancient Egyptians believed that death did not sever identity. The ka, or life force, continued, while the ba, another aspect of the soul, could travel freely. Sleep provided a time when the living and the dead shared a thin boundary, allowing insight, reassurance, and quiet communication. Families understood that rest near tombs was more than practical. It was spiritual, reinforcing connections invisible to the eye but felt deeply in daily life. Tombs were designed to support this continuity. Open courtyards, low platforms, and accessible chambers encouraged visitors to remain for extended periods. Walls were adorned with inscriptions and images depicting family, work, and ritual. These carvings were reminders of continuity, reinforcing calm and focus during rest. Even modest tombs reflected this understanding, integrating spaces for offerings, meditation, and occasional sleep. Architecture and ritual worked together to normalize the closeness of life and death. Even small gestures mattered. Lighting a lamp before sleep, arranging mats near a burial space, or quietly speaking a name reinforced the bond between generations. Over time, these acts created a rhythm that shaped the household. The living and the dead existed in a continuous, gentle cycle. Sleep became both a pause and a connection, a nightly affirmation of the enduring presence of ancestors. Ancestors were believed to offer protection, guidance, and reassurance. Families trusted that sleeping near the dead could prevent misfortune, promote well-being, and enhance clarity in dreams. Dreams themselves were carefully interpreted. Messages from the deceased might appear as guidance for farming, family matters, or health. This practice, repeated over generations, wove life, memory, and spiritual awareness into a continuous pattern. Night after night, the living experienced calm influence from those who had passed. Children grew up with a natural sense of continuity. They understood that life was layered across generations. Sleeping near tombs was normal, comforting, and even necessary. They learned patience, respect, and awareness through these quiet nightly routines. They saw that the dead were not frightening or absent, but steady, supportive presences integrated into daily life. Through centuries, this practice reinforced a broader worldview. Life and death were not opposites but intertwined stages. Sleep, rituals, and nightly presence created calm, enduring relationships between generations. Families maintained continuity, honor, and memory with subtle gestures repeated daily. The dead were participants in life's rhythm, and the living were stewards of their ongoing presence. As night settled over homes, villages, and desert landscapes, people rested in quiet proximity to tombs. Lamps flickered softly. Mats were arranged with care. Children and adults alike drifted into sleep, reassured by the presence of ancestors. Dreams came and went. Subtle messages traveled gently, and the living maintained calm connection across time. The dead remained close, and life flowed steadily, uninterrupted and serene. And so, over thousands of years, families practiced this gentle communion, embedding the dead into the daily and nightly rhythms of existence. Sleep became a shared experience, memory became living guidance, and continuity persisted quietly, calmly, and naturally across generations. Over centuries, sleeping near the dead became more than a routine. It became a philosophy of life. Families understood that life and death were not separate, but intertwined in a continuous flow. The presence of ancestors offered stability, guidance, and reassurance. Nightly rest beside tombs reinforced this connection, creating a rhythm in which generations overlapped without conflict. And memory was kept alive, not through ceremony alone, but through quiet, ongoing presence. As households passed down tombs from one generation to the next, practices adapted naturally. Mats were laid in familiar positions. Lamps were placed to cast soft light on inscriptions and carvings, and offerings were replenished regularly. Even when the physical structure of the tomb changed, the principle remained the same. The dead were present, the living were mindful, and sleep became a bridge between worlds. This continuity created a gentle, unbroken thread linking centuries, families, and the cycles of life. Children born into these households accepted this rhythm as ordinary. They learned that resting near tombs was safe, natural, and even comforting. Stories of ancestors, shared in conversation or observed in images and inscriptions, became lived experience rather than abstract history. In dreams, subtle guidance might arrive. In waking hours, calm reassurance was felt. Through these interactions, the line between the past and the present blurred, fostering a sense of security, order, and continuity. The physical preservation of bodies reinforced the practice. Mummified ancestors remained visible and intact, their presence tangible. This tangible form anchored the spiritual connection, making sleep beside tombs feel protective rather than intimidating. Families trusted that the deceased watched over them, offering guidance during vulnerable hours and sustaining a steady influence across generations. In this way, the practice combined practicality, spirituality, and continuity in a single enduring pattern. Sleep itself became a ritual, quiet but meaningful. The act of resting near the dead, of acknowledging their presence, and of maintaining spaces for offerings, created a gentle, repeated affirmation of family and culture. Night after night, generations participated in the same rhythm, reinforcing a worldview in which death did not sever connection but extended it. Sleep, dreams, and daily attention together preserved memory, reinforced guidance, and ensured the ongoing participation of ancestors in the household. Even the smallest gestures were significant. A whispered name, a piece of bread left beside a tomb, a mat positioned carefully, each action reinforced the bond across time. Over centuries, these small acts accumulated into a cultural fabric in which the dead remained participants. Life flowed steadily, and sleep became a time of subtle connection rather than isolation. Families did not fear the night. They welcomed it as a space where continuity and calm prevailed. The surrounding environment enhanced this practice. Tombs were often placed near homes, temples, or desert edges, where the air was dry and cool. Stone walls preserved both temperature and quiet, creating spaces conducive to rest. Within these calm environments, living and dead shared space seamlessly. Lamps flickered softly, shadows moved gently, and the rhythm of breathing blended with the enduring presence of ancestors. Sleep became part of a larger, continuous awareness of life across generations. Through millennia, this tradition shaped Egyptian culture. It created households that lived in quiet harmony with memory, ancestry, and the cycles of life. The dead were not forgotten or feared. They were integrated into daily practice. Sleep was not escape but connection. Night was not isolation but shared time. Through these gentle practices, generations maintained continuity, stability, and understanding of life as a slow, unbroken journey in which death was not the end but a continuation. And so, night after night, families rested beside tombs. Children and adults lay on mats, lamps casting soft light over walls adorned with names and carvings. Dreams drifted gently, messages moved subtly, and presence persisted quietly. The dead watched, the living rested, and generations intertwined without effort or ceremony. Life and death coexisted seamlessly. Continuity prevailed, and the rhythm of existence flowed steadily, calmly, and eternally. In this quiet harmony, the practice endured for thousands of years, a testament to a worldview in which the living slept beside the dead, not in fear, but in trust, connection, and serene acceptance. Sleep, memory, and presence intertwined. Life continued, death persisted, and the world, calm and steady, carried both gently forward.